Hey everyone, I'm Tyler with Leggari. Our products have been changing the coating industry since day one. We manufacture and sell user-friendly, industrial-grade coatings that last for years. With Leggari products, transforming surfaces like this has never been easier. Whether it's countertops or floors, driveways, patios, walls, even art projects. In this video, I'm going to show you how to install one of the easiest countertop kits on the market, giving your kitchen that natural stone designer look. Here we go. All right, so I'm gonna go over how to apply our WB primer. We're gonna be using our white primer today. So this is basically what you need to install the primer. A 3/8 snap roller, and I'm gonna show you how to de-shed it. We got a roller tray to dip and roll, mixing container, and then obviously the primer, stir stick, and gloves. So before I put my gloves on, I wanna de-shed this roller. We always like to use just painter's tape, yellow painter's tape. So we'll just stick it to a flat surface, and then we're just gonna run our roller on it. And that's gonna pull off any loose fibers, any hairs that are gonna come off onto the primer. All right, so the next step, we're gonna take our A and B and we're gonna just shake that up real quick. And then we'll start with the part A. So we're gonna pour this out. And then I have another container that has 2 ounces of water. We're gonna be adding that to the primer. So the part B is gonna be the pigmented part. It's gonna be a little bit thicker. Kind of tilt that back, get any leftover that's in the handle. Get the majority of that out, and then we're gonna take our water, 2 ounces, and we're gonna add that to the part B. And then we'll shake that up. That's gonna get all the leftover stuff in the bucket out. And then we can mix this with just a stir stick. Mixes really easy. So we'll just mix this 2 to 3 minutes. Want to scrape the sides as we're mixing, scrape the bottom, but again, really easy to mix. And you don't have to use measuring containers to mix it. Just make sure it's at least a quart size container that'll fit the countertop primer into it. All right, so we're ready to go. So we're gonna just dump this into the roller tray. I'm not gonna need all this primer. We send out extra primer because sometimes, like what we have here is a dark counter, we're doing a white primer over it. So I'm probably gonna hit my edges twice, the faces, maybe even the top, just depends on how well it covers it. We just wanna make sure we can get these counters as wide as we can get them, especially on the vertical edges. So we'll just soak this in for a minute, get this roller saturated with that primer. And then we're gonna do a pass right down the middle, and then just cross roll that edge to edge. Now, as you can see, the primer gets rolled on thin, very similar to if you were painting. Now this is fine coverage for the top, even though you can kind of see through in some spots. The main thing is our faces, vertical spots, our corners. We want these as bright a white as we can get them, because the resin doesn't ever go on these faces, vertical surfaces this thick. So we want to get these nice and white. All right guys, so I'll show you something. Like, we got some separation, little fish eyes here. Sometimes you'll get that on like Formica surfaces like that. Don't worry about it. This can set up for about 10 minutes and I can re-roll these spots and then they won't separate again because the primer is starting to set up and get sticky. You can actually probably hit it right now and see if it comes back. If it does, just let it set up a little more. So what we've done on this backsplash, since there's no tile, I've taped it off, taped the counter off, and then I painted the same color of wall paint right on this edge. So what that's going to do is seal up this tape and minimize any bleed marks, because trying to tape onto a textured surface, you're almost every time going to get bleed marks unless you kind of seal that up with either a latex caulk, paintable caulking, or the same color of paint. So just keep that in mind when you guys are doing your tops. Obviously, if it's tile, you would want to do like a clear latex paintable caulking to seal that tape line. If it's just a painted wall, you can just use the same paint color like we did here. So the next step after the primer's set up a little, we got to tape our edges. That's kind of the process with our Leggari stone kit. So cool thing about our primers, it's fast cure and it's still going to cure underneath the tape. So we can tape onto a sticky where you can't do that with a lot of other primers. So this doesn't have to be completely dry. So it's still really, really sticky, but it's not pulling anything off. So when we tape, we want to tape about half of the tape thickness above the counter. And we're using 1.8 inch painter's tape, yellow tape, Scotch tape, whatever you want to call it. And I'll kind of show you the process. So again, we want to tape about half of the tape on the counter and half above it. So what I'll do is I'll pull the tape out and then I'll get tension on it and then I'll put it right where I want it and then just push it in. So there's one strip. Now we're going to do it again just to double the tape up, make it a little more rigid. And try to get it at the same height or close to. All right, now we don't want to assume that the tape's pushed down good, so we want to go around and really press that in, creating a nice seal so none of the resin runs underneath the tape. And then we always like to pinch our corners. It's going to add a little bit more tension to the long parts of the counter. And I'll just put my finger in the corner and then just pinch it with my other hand. When you guys get in your inside corners, really kind of work that into there before you go on. We don't want to have a gap behind that tape. And that's how simple it is, guys. So now we're ready to do our Leggari stone kit. Tim's gonna show you how to mix it, and then I'm gonna get right to applying it.
All right, with this kit, we're gonna use 1.5 gallons of the clear metallic epoxy, 1.5 gallons of the pigmented white epoxy, midnight pearl, adamantium, and white Leggari effects. This kit is going to be absolutely beautiful. The first thing we want to do is get Tyler a base coat to lay out on the entire counter. So we want to give him about 63 ounces of clear resin. So the first thing we want to do is pour 42 ounces of A into this container. And what I'll do is I'll actually take the rest of the A and I'll dump it out in a bucket so it can start emptying. And then we'll take, if we have 42 ounces of A, we want 21 ounces of B because it's a 2-to-1 resin. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour the part B into the part A. I'm going to mix it for a couple minutes. I'm going to have it on a fairly low to medium speed, scraping the bottom and the sides of the container with the drill head, moving it up and down. Then after about 1.5 minutes, I'm going to dump it into a brand new container and mix it for another about 30 seconds. That'll ensure we have no soft spots anywhere on these counters. Now you got to be careful with some of these containers. Some of them are pretty fragile. So if you turn the drill up fast and it nicks the side of the bucket, we've actually had some of these blow out on the sides. Okay, now I'm going to transfer it into a new container. So now these two containers and this stir stick, they're pretty much garbage because we know there's some unmixed resin within those. So we don't want to deal anymore with those containers. We're just going to throw those away. I spilled a little bit of resin here. It's important to keep your workstation clean, so we have some denatured alcohol, just some paper towels, and anytime you drip epoxy, it's just going to get worse if you don't get on top of it and clean it up. So we think it's pretty important to keep your workstation clean. Now what I'm going to do is mix this again for about 30 seconds, moving the drill up and down a little bit, and it'll be ready to go. Now this is ready to go. We'll give this to Tyler and he can start spreading this out.
All right guys, so I'm gonna go over applying the base coat, the thin base coat. We wanna get out of the bucket as soon as we can. I'm gonna show you how to do this island, and then I'm gonna have Tim start mixing the actual kit while I finish it. So I'll show you the process here. I'll continue it here, and then we'll go and watch Tim mix up the rest of the kit. So when you guys start applying your base coat, whoever's helping you mix, you want them to start mixing all the colors and doing that, because that takes a little time, and it's always nice to be able to apply your Leggari kit, stone kit, right when you're done with the base coat. So what we're gonna do, I'm gonna pour out smaller beads, and I can come back and add to them. What I'm looking for is to get these to spread out about the same thickness everywhere. And you wanna keep in mind the differences in surfaces, right? I got a wider surface here, I got a skinnier surface here, so I'm not gonna need as much product on this area as I would out here. So instead of doing 2 beads, I'm gonna do 1 bead on all these counters, and then the island will get 2 beads. And again, I can come back and add to these. It's a lot easier to do that than to try to scoop it up back into the bucket and then move it to somewhere else on the counter. So we can see we got a white, so I don't want to pour any there. I'm just going to add a little more to the rest of this. Try to get these as close to the same width when they level out. Okay, so I got my beads poured out. Now if you guys are rolling this out and you get done and you say you have way too much resin in one area, just scoop some of that back in the bucket and pour it out anywhere else where it may be thin. But the fastest way to do this is take a squeegee. You can use a paint stick, a piece of cardboard, anything that's kind of rigid, a putty knife, and we're just kind of flattening this off. It's a lot faster way than instead of trying to roll this out. We will still roll it using a foam roller, because when you put resin on thin, it's a lot stickier and tends to pull fibers off of that pair of rollers. So we like to use a foam roller when we're doing thin coats like this. But you can see how fast I'm spreading this out. So we like to do the squeegee first, get it close to all our edges. And notice I'm not scraping it completely tight. It's still leaving resin behind. Hold that squeegee at a low angle. Just kind of flattening that all off. Reason we like the Bondo squeegees, they are a plastic, almost like a silicone plastic, and once the resin gets hard, it just breaks right off of it. Easy to clean. And then we'll take our foam roller and we're just going to roll it out to help even everything out. We're just looking for a nice thin coat everywhere, and that's going to let the epoxy level out a lot easier. So you can hear my roller making a sticky sound. We want to get it rolled out until my roller's kind of quiet. Notice it's not making any sounds. That means we got a good thin thickness everywhere. Anywhere it's making a sound, I'm just kind of moving some resin there. And that's it, guys. So I'll finish applying the base coat, and Tim's going to start mixing up the actual kit. So when I'm done, I can start immediately pouring it out.
Okay, so we've been draining the rest of the part A of the clear into a bucket. We want to do the same thing for the pigmented white. You want to remember too that If you pour too fast, the epoxy can get caught up in the top of this handle, so you want to tip it back over for about 5 to 10 seconds and then dump it back over and just let it drain for a few more seconds. But really what you're waiting for is you're just waiting for any type of stream to be done. You just want it to come to a drip. Okay, I'll let the pigmented white part A to continue to drip, and we'll mix up the clear epoxy now. So we want to take the B to the clear epoxy. We want to pour that in, and we're going to do the same thing we just did in these containers. We're just going to mix the rest of this clear epoxy together for about 1.5 minutes. So you can see this is really starting to get to a less of a stream and a little more of a drip, so that part B is good. We're going to use a larger paddle drill to get to the bottom of this bucket. All right, after you've mixed it for about 1.5 minutes, we're going to take two quart containers. You can use 2.5 quart containers as well. We're just going to split it evenly between these two. I'll scrape this out as well. We want to get all the resin we can out of the bucket. Now what I'm going to do is I have a mask. Obviously I need to talk, but I recommend you do this outside. Don't do it inside the building or the house, wherever you're working. But we're going to pour the adamantium in one container. You can even just take a vacuum, like a shop vac, and just have the nozzle up by where you're working, and it'll just suck up the dust. But I'll put a respirator on, and I'll mix these up just to fully submerge all the metallics. And what I'm doing is I'm also giving that batch of resin a second mix, which is very important. The other thing I'll mention is I'm using the smaller drill again, and you don't need to change the drill head out when you're mixing different colors. Just always start at the lightest color and work your way to the darkest color, and the colors won't be affected that way. All right, now these batches are ready to go, and we'll just finish mixing up the white. So our resin has tons of working time and pot life, but even though it has lots of time to work with it, you still don't want to lollygag and take a long time to do stuff. So this is pretty much done dripping, just a real fine stream. So we'll close that up. Add our ½ gallon of hardener to it. And what's different about this than the last batch is I'm going to mix this up just like the very first small batch we did for Tyler. I'm going to mix this up for about 1.5 minutes and then dump it into another bucket, mix it up for about 30 seconds. Just because we won't have an opportunity to mix this a second time, we have to do it right now. And I'm going to be using the same paddle mixer as I did with the clear large batch because it's not going to affect the white at all. Okay, now that I've mixed that up for about a minute and a half, we're gonna dump it into a brand new bucket and mix it up for another 30 seconds. And then we'll put all of these batches together and start the process. Now you're going to take 5 new 2-quart containers or 2.5-quart containers, and we're going to take all of the epoxy that we've mixed up and we're going to put it in these. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the white Leggari Effects, mix it really well, and I'm going to put a little bit of it in the top of each of these before I start pouring them out. It doesn't take much. This stuff is really potent. And what we're going to do is we're just going to layer this. Tons of white, layers, some adamantium, midnight pearl. Now I'm just going to add some more white. The idea of this kit is that we want it to have lots of white, but we love the accent with these dark colors. I might pour these in together a little bit. You almost can't screw this up. We're trying to get lots of movement within these mixing containers. Now I might just take the midnight pearl by itself, put a little ribbon across it, create another layer right there in the middle. What I want to do is I'm going to take the extra and I'm going to pour it into a cup, and we'll probably use it towards the end of the countertop. Pour. Notice how messy it is, guys. That's all right. That's the world of resin. So I got my white right there. Midnight pearl right here. And we'll do some beautiful accent veins right at the end. So now we could even use some of this white Leggari effects. So we have 5 batches to work with on the counter. A batch of white by itself, black, and the Leggari effects. This is gonna be beautiful.
All right, so we want to get these buckets poured out as soon as we can. I'm going to show you how to kind of create a design in your top so you have something to follow, or you can just dump it out. It doesn't matter. It's always going to look cool. I'm just taking a leftover stick from mixing, and I'm just going to kind of run that through, giving me something to kind of follow. And I like to be more random, the better. Some jaggedy edges, some half circles. Do that. We'll get a couple over on this counter here. This will just kind of give me something to follow as I'm starting to pour out. All right, so we'll just get to it. So I'm just gonna follow this line. And when you're doing your first pours out of the buckets, they're gonna come out quick because it's got a lot in it. So we wanna try to move quickly. We'll do one here. Notice how I'm kind of jumping all over the place. I don't wanna just pour one container out all on one half of the counter. And then we'll jump to this side. So I'm gonna save a little bit in here. It's not gonna heat up on me when there's not a lot in there. Plus we're moving so fast. So I'll do another bucket and then maybe I'll start on this side, right? I don't wanna keep doing my first pours in the same spot. So now that we have a fresh bucket, I could even do it on this half of the counter, or I can start somewhere else, and we'll just start on a different area of this top. Okay, so another thing to keep in mind, I can notice that when I first start pouring out, I'm getting a lot of the darker colors, and then when I get to the end, I'm getting a lot of the light colors, okay? So I wanna make sure I'm getting some of this white, lighter pours out on this counter. So what I'm doing is when I get to that area where I'm getting a lot of the white, I'm saving these for later on to get them in other areas. So we're gonna start out on this counter. We wanna get some dark color, right? Because my first pours are really dark, so I'm gonna start over here and get some more dark colors out on this top. And that's just kind of something you want to take note of as you're pouring your beads out. All right, so now I'm taking note, right? I got a lot of these back counters kind of filled up. I want to start getting more of this island filled up. I don't want to wind up pouring too much of my epoxy out on the back counters and not having enough out here. So I have 2 full ones left and 2 quarter full ones. So we're just going to take the full one out here, start pouring it out, and then I'm going to use some of the leftover where we're down to that white and get some more white out here as well. So guys, when I'm pouring in between beads like this, I'm trying not to pour, like say I'm coming in here, this is probably gonna level out and fill in. It's really thick in these spots and they're slowly leveling out. So I wanna take note of that. I don't wanna just start pouring big piles next to big piles. So I wanna kind of split the gap, right? Stuff like this is gonna wind up filling in. So I'm just kind of going around and being more precise with the pours. All right, so I got about a quarter bucket left. So I wanna make sure I'm pouring the biggest areas out. Again, guys, this is gonna level out a lot, and we are in a cold warehouse. Our resin is pretty cold, so you definitely wanna acclimate your products to room temperature. It's gonna level out, it's gonna flow better, but I'm not even worried about it. There's still a lot of these beads that are gonna wind up touching. So again, though, we don't wanna wind up pouring too much out in one area and then it's really thick there and it's thinner somewhere else. So that's kind of why I keep jumping around to different spots. And so since we have this left and just the solid white and the solid black, again, I'm gonna just kind of pour smaller amounts out in some of these areas. And notice how I'm pouring kind of in between everywhere. All right, guys, so now I'm taking the black, the solid black that Tim got for me, and I'm just gonna follow some of these veins and kind of highlight some of these spots. So I like to pinch it so a lot doesn't come out. Get a really tight, small vein. And I like to follow like a hard edge where like two colors are meeting. All right guys, so we got a little left. I'm gonna show you how to widen out your bead. So we're gonna pour it on just some cardboard here. And then we're gonna let that drip off. Hold it close to the epoxy. And that'll help fill in any wide spots that you have left. But again, this is still gonna level out and fill in a lot of these areas over the next 30, 45 minutes anyways. All right, so what I did, I add a little bit of some leftovers black and some of these other dirty pours into the white, and we'll just stir that real quick just to tone that down a little so it's not like a solid white bead, and then we'll kind of finish everything up. So I'm just looking for any spots that are missing some of the resin, any clear spots. And then when I get close to the end of this cup, I'll do some really small fracture veins too. All right, so now I'm gonna show you how to blend in some of these beads, because you can tell they're just like half circles because I can't pour right up to the wall perfect. So we're just gonna kind of blend those in a little bit just so they don't look like half circles. And don't worry about messing the design up. And I'm also looking for any missed spots. We're just touching those up. Like you can see just a lot of clear here. So I can see down to the primer there. So we'll just kind of blend that in a little bit. Just any spot like this doesn't exactly look natural. And guys, if you say you poured out a fracture vein, like it's pretty wide right here, I can tone that down by just running my finger through it real quick. Give it more of a natural look. So again, guys, anywhere that just kind of looks like it was poured up to the wall, I'm just blending in a little bit. So when I'm blending this, notice I'm not like going across the pattern. I'm kind of following whatever pattern I'm kind of blending in. We don't want to just start smearing it around just randomly. I'm kind of following the exact pattern. So I'll kind of blend this in, and it's going to look a lot more natural when I'm done. All right, guys, so before I spray the isopropyl, you can see a lot of the Leggari effects creating some cells. A lot of these are from adding the Leggari effects into our resin. Just dumping that in there, pouring it into the dirty pour cups, and we get a lot of these cool craters and effects just from that, our Leggari effect pigment. So really cool. This one did it a lot right here, really, really cool. Similar to what you would get when you spray the isopropyl alcohol. So now that we've got everything done, everything's kind of filled in, we blended in any hard edges or anything that we didn't like, we kind of blended in with the fingers. Now I'm gonna spray the isopropyl 91% or higher, just clear, and we're just gonna spritz the surface, and it's gonna create some even more effects on it. Again, you don't have to do this. If you just mist the surface with like a fine mist, that's not gonna create the cells as much, and it'll pop any of the micro bubbles that are on the surface. But again, our resin lets the air out of the epoxy and self-pop. So a lot of times we don't even have to spray the isopropyl to pop bubbles. So I'm just gonna hit it by barely pulling the trigger. Notice how I'm just kind of spritzing it, getting those smaller to medium-sized droplets. And that's why you guys never see us torch our resin, because we don't have to. It's got additives that allow those bubbles to rise to the surface and self-pop. All right, so we're happy with the counters. Just spray the isopropyl. Now we just want to wait for the perfect time to pull the tape. And it can vary in between an hour to 2 hours after you're actually done with the counter, depending on the room temperatures and stuff like that. So I'm going to show you an easy way to kind of know the right time to pull. So we obviously just got done, so it's going to be really fluid. You can kind of see how fast it's moving down the tape. If I pull the tape right now, it's going to drag a lot of that design from the top all around the edges. We're going to lose a lot of the resin, so I want to let this set up, start to get sticky, and then when I bend that tape back and it's just barely moving super slow, that's the perfect time to pull it. Now if you have really thick edges you're going to want to pull it a little sooner, that way you can flow down those edges more. We have some really typical countertop thickness edges here, so we'll probably give this about an hour, come back, pull the tape, and I'll show you what we're looking for as far as how fast it's flowing down the tape before we do that. All right, so it's about time to pull the tape. So I'm gonna show you what we're looking for when it's that time, right? We don't want this resin too fluid, and we also don't want it too sticky to where it's not gonna flow over. So when I pull this tape back, you're gonna see it just slowly start moving. Now again, we don't have a thick edge to cover, so this is about the right time. If you guys were doing a really thick edge or something, you would probably wanna pull it a little sooner. But it's been about, I want to say, an hour and a half, maybe hour 45 minutes. And we're just going to pull the tape now. And you'll see, by the time I get back around, this will probably be halfway down the face. So you can see kind of where we started. It's already halfway down the counter. Another 5-10 minutes, that whole edge is going to be coated and look absolutely beautiful. So we'll just continue the process. We had a couple spots on here that kind of blew out. Right here started leaking, so we cleaned it off, re-taped the bottom edge to minimize that. And you'll have to deal with that sometimes. We went on the primer maybe a tad bit too early, but even that, the primer's not peeling off because it's still gonna set up underneath that tape. It's just an amazing primer. So check it out, guys. Our Leggari stone kits create that natural look and flow of veins coming down at angles over the edges, right? They're not coming straight down like a standard kit would, because we're letting it set up. And then when we pull that tape, it kind of keeps that exact design and runs down the edge even at angles. It's super, super cool. So last thing we want to do is just help coat these edges. So I'm just going anywhere that's not covered yet and just brushing some of the epoxy in. Notice I'm not doing the whole edge because it's already coated, just where there's spots that aren't coated all the way. And don't worry about messing your design up, because it's still going to drip for another half an hour to another hour, and you're going to run over and flow and wind up coating that whole edge anyway. So don't worry about screwing the design up. Just brush in the spots that need it, and the rest will just kind of flow over naturally. Now the only spots that might need a little resin are your corners, but what I like to do is just get some from somewhere else, push it up there, and again, don't worry about messing up the design. It's still gonna flow over and bring that top design right down your face. All right, so we can come over here where we started, brushing that in. You can see it's all the way down to the bottom already, the design. Super, super cool process. All right, so I'll go over how to scrape your drips. It's really simple. When it's kind of fluid like this, even though it's a little sticky, but it's still fluid and dripping, we can use a paint stick. When it starts to set up and get really sticky, I like to use like a putty knife or something really thin and just cut that off, because if you use a thick wide paint stick, when it sets up, it's gonna build up on your paint stick and wind up putting some of that material back on your edge, and we don't wanna do that. We wanna kind of shave that off and get a nice clean edge. If you wake up the next day or come back and you have some drips, take 80 grit, 100 grit sandpaper. You can sand those flat and then apply your top coat. And whenever you're doing the Leggari effects, spray paints, anything like that, you always want a top coat to lock all that stuff into the counter. So just remember that whenever you're using those type of effects or spray paints and stuff. That way that's not on the actual surface, it's locked underneath a top coat. So what I do is I'll just take the paint stick and we're just gonna run it flat, and you can see it build up. Notice how it's just falling off. Now if this is really sticky, it would be attaching back to the countertop and starting to pull and drag. And so that's when we'd want to use like a putty knife. That's basically all you need to do to scrape your drips. And you'll probably have to do this periodically over the next hour or so while the resin's starting to set up completely to where it doesn't want to drip anymore. But it's real fast, doesn't take long. All right guys, so a few things. When you're doing dispersing sprays, dispersing effects, sometimes you'll create divots or pinholes or something like that in the actual epoxy. We don't really see those a lot with the Leggari stone kits, typically on like the standard kits where they're thinner, usually on people's edges where there's not enough product. It can get down to the primer. Just pat those spots in, don't assume they're gonna level out. That's pretty much it. So we'll let this set up, get hard, scrape our drips a couple more times, and then we'll show you guys the after footage once we clean it all up. You just saw how simple it was to install a Leggari stone kit. If your kitchen needs an update, we have the right products for you. Go to Leggari.com, order your kit today. Let's take a closer look.